Well, holy crap, I never thought that I would be talking about the Mana franchise again. This is a series that has gone through such ups and downs so many times that I thought that Square Enix just basically decided that the franchise had Star Fox syndrome and there wasn't even any more point in trying anymore. So, I make the comparison to Star Fox because that was a game that came out on the Super Nintendo and was a technical achievement. Not necessarily great, but a decent technical achievement that was then re-realized on the Nintendo 64. And it was fantastic for what it was trying to do. And then we got a whole bunch of spin-offs and just other crap that no one asked for. A Zelda-style game that I guess could have been good if it was well made, but it wasn't. And then just these other offshoots and just complete reworkings of mechanics where it's like, hey, Nintendo, haven't you realized yet that you are unable to innovate at this point in time? And at least give us something like the game that we all loved, instead of trying to reinvent yourselves every time, like you're Sonic the Hedgehog and failing miserably, just like them as well. That's kind of what Square was doing with the Mana franchise, where the original game, in which this is the second remake of, was pretty good for the Game Boy. And then the Super Nintendo, just a great game for its time. A few technical limitations kind of hold it back from being phenomenal when looking back at the title at this point, but at the time, being able to play with two other friends in an adventure-style game in an RPG was just fantastic. However, how about then Square just deciding not to release the immediate sequel to that video game? And then when we finally get a game out of Japan, it's Legend of Mana for the PlayStation 1, which sort of resembled the game that we all fell in love with on the Super Nintendo, but wasn't that game or anything close to it. And then the franchise just kept going down the hole with the terrible RTS game, Heroes of Mana. Children of Mana, which kind of resembled the Super Nintendo game except extremely repetitive. Dawn of Mana, which the geniuses, the brilliant geniuses over at Square Enix decided, hey, instead of letting you level your character and gaining more powers throughout the game, how about every level we just reset their level down to 0 and then make them grind for an hour in order to have a competitive chance and actually enjoy themselves? How about we put that feature into a video game? That is what the brilliant minds did over at Square Enix. They basically took a Gatling gun, pointed basically straight into their mouths, and then pulled the trigger with amazing accuracy. So now we have Adventures of Mana, which, like I said, the second remake of the original game, Final Fantasy Adventure, or Seiken Densetsu's Final Fantasy Gaiden over in Japan. Now, Sword of Mana was the first remake for the Game Boy Advance, which, similar to Legend of Mana, which was kind of poised to refine what made Secret of Mana so great. However, they kind of botched the fact that no one wants to read a detailed FAQ in order to figure out how to get to the right next level within the video game, which I know sounds incredibly vague and makes absolutely no sense, and that's because the game itself made absolutely no sense. There's a whole bunch of systems that are completely the antithesis of action-adventure gaming that basically required college-level research in order to properly play the game. A failed experiment, I guess you could say, just a poor implementation of a whole bunch of really advanced systems that had no explanation anywhere, except game facts on the internet, or in some guidebook probably. Now we have a more one-to-one remake, where the original game, very similar to Legend of Zelda back on the black and white Game Boy, was quite a technical achievement. So, kind of keeping in line with that Star Fox analogy. Fun game. Really enjoyed it. Was exactly the type of action-adventure game you would expect to be on a Game Boy. Not that advanced, but a good game. Now we have this. Alright, time to get this out up front there is some sloppy ass shit going on in this video game. If we were talking about a delicious fruit, an orange, maybe an apple, this is like some baby. This is like some baby just decided to throw up on that delicious apple or orange. Where perhaps if we clean that shit off and did a little washing and just peeled off the outer level for good measure, there would be some delicious fruit inside. That's what this game is. It was originally made for phones, iOS and Android, and then, as it seems, second in mind, the Vita. Now, the Vita version is the version to play. You need the D-pad or the analog stick, and you need physical tactile buttons to play this, or else you're going to have a miserable time. And what the heck are you doing gaming if you are trying to play games like this with a touch screen? It doesn't work. Hasn't everyone realized this yet? However, some of that user interface from the phone versions of the game have made their way into the Vita version, where it's kind of interesting. Now, typically with a PlayStation video game, regardless of which PlayStation it's released on, there are certain expectations to the user interface to make sure that it's friendly and that things are intuitive and things make sense. Not so much here. There are no instructions anywhere within the game itself. However, you need to assign buttons to the items and magic spells that you wish to use most often. You either assign one of your items or magic spells to the square button, or you can do something where you hold the L1 button and then you use one of the face buttons to perform a magic spell or use an item quickly. Fair enough, but the way that you do that is unintuitive, which means that the surface level design of the game is annoying to contend with. Now, that surface level, all it takes is learning it once and then you've figured it out, but it's there and it's worth mentioning. Also, you have your item ring that comes up, and that is a little clunky to deal with. Not game-breaking, not even particularly horrible, but it doesn't improve the overall enjoyment of the video game. You need a good user interface and something that just feels like it has good design in order to enjoy yourself and to more meld into the experience of the game, in which Adventures of Mana does a sloppy job. Now, the other thing that is particularly annoying that is bad surface level design is that when you're moving from screen to screen, so it's a game where you play from an overhead perspective and you move to the right, and then when you hit the edge of the screen and you keep moving right, you then move into the next screen. Well, when you do that, enemies will spontaneously appear in random positions. That random position can be right on top of you or just one space away. So say you're holding right, you're going right, you're switching screens. If you don't just immediately lift off of the D-pad and wait for enemies to spawn, you're gonna walk right into something, which is annoying as hell and just shouldn't be happening in a game like this. It should know that there is a certain sphere of where you enter the screen that you shouldn't spawn an enemy, at least in most cases, because that's just going to annoy the player. It doesn't require skillful gameplay at that point. It requires you to go, oh, yeah, the game likes to spawn shit right on top of you. I need to be aware of that. That's not fun. That's sloppy design. There are a few elements of sloppy design just throughout the game that are particularly annoying. Not game-breaking. They don't necessarily make the game not fun, but it's something to contend with. And it's the type of thing that makes you go, okay, yeah, this is never going to go down as a classic, because it's not really innovating in any brilliant sort of way. And it's not doing what has been done before, literally, in this case, with an amazing degree of accuracy in terms of what it wants to do. It's just kind of messy. And you can even say that that extends itself to the graphic style. The art style leaves some to be desired. This is kind of like one of those basic 3D video games that often come out where the art style is essentially, okay, we need a hero with the sword, let's just make a generic hero with the sword, and here are some enemies that look like a glob of polygons. That's most of the art design here, and I'll say that that includes the music as well. You can tell once again that the game had its birth on phones because there isn't a very wide selection of tracks to listen to, and it's mostly just generic. So beyond all of that, I found this game oddly playable. Now, I think part of that was just some of the mana isms with the game itself. You get to ride a chocobo at some point, and use that to get from locale to locale in a fast fashion without having to fight anything, which reminded me of, well, Final Fantasy games, but I like some of that old school video game design. And I found it here. I like the fact that the bosses in this game aren't all necessarily puzzle bosses, where you don't have to be a detective in terms of how to go about beating the boss, where you can either try to beat the boss cleverly and do what you're supposed to do, but if you've leveled yourself enough, you could probably just tank that motherfucker. And I like that old game design that isn't so specific in trying to control the experience that you have when it comes to these big enemy bosses. It just lets you go about it in the way that you like, and you can play it sloppy and perhaps squeak by, or you can play the boss in the exact manner that you should and do a great job. I like that old school design that isn't so form-fitting into a certain style of play. I also just like an overhead video game that has a whole bunch of screens where you need to figure out where to go, but it's not too complex, and you fight people with a sword or a whip or a chain or whatever the hell you decide to equip. And there are a lot of weapons in this game, which is really cool, and there isn't necessarily a best weapon to use. Now, for a period of time, maybe a certain weapon is considered stronger than the other weapons, and so obviously your choice is going to be that. But at other times, you get to kind of just, choose the weapon as according to your playstyle, and you can use more magic within the game. You can focus on developing your magic skills whenever you level up and be more offensive in trying to fight enemies by basically just setting them on fire, or you can level up your physical combat skills, and that's really cool. The game doesn't bog you down too much with puzzles or anything that doesn't make sense, which I will hold against the original Zelda game in terms of when you go back and play it years later. The original Zelda game has some really weird shit that you can't just really know without researching or talking to someone else. Adventures of Mana, and even the original Final Fantasy Adventure, doesn't have that, save for one point, which really annoyed me, because I was thinking about this as I was playing it. I was thinking about doing a review for the game as I was playing it, and I was thinking about how I was going to be able to say that there was no shitty puzzle design in this video game that made absolutely no sense. And then it did it. Once. God damn it. So, I spent a good deal of time thinking about why I kind of enjoyed this game and why I kept being drawn to turn it back on, even though a lot of it is just sloppy, as I've talked about. I wasn't having that much fun with this video game, but it was like, well, I can play this. And it comes down to, essentially, this game plays to a lot of things that I like in old school video game design. It just kind of doesn't do it that well, but this stuff isn't done that often. And when it is, it's almost too user-friendly, where instead of just dropping you in, it's giving you a tutorial every second. This game doesn't do that. It reminds me somewhat of original Legend of Zelda, where you're just in a dungeon and you need to figure out where the heck to go. The game isn't designed to be perfect and to hold your hand the entire time. It's just a playground to have fun with. And once I got over some of the bad design decisions, it was fun to just hang out in this world and move forward. I liked that quite a bit. Also, the game isn't that hard. It's actually really easy. And the only times that I died in this game was because I got way too sloppy in a boss battle and figured that I could tank the remainder of its health rather than be bothered to open a menu and use a healing item. That's the only reason I ever died in this game. My own lazy ass self. So it was a fun world to kind of hang out in that wasn't too challenging, that had some gameplay mechanics that I really used to enjoy back in the day. And I like Mana stuff. I like stuff within the Mana franchise, which drives me to think that this game isn't even as good as I thought it was. and that I'm just a little biased, because I have played most of the mana games, and even the ones that I technically claim to not like, I still managed to play through. So, in conclusion, I must be mentally deficient. Adventures of Mana, it's a kind of fun game. It's kind of fun. It's kind of amusing. It's kind of playful. It's a little annoying at times. When you spawn on top of an enemy, yes, you get instantly damaged, but it's not as if the game is hard, and it's not as if the enemies take away so much health that it actually even matters. Now, do I recommend this title? Probably not, unless you really enjoy mana games. And even so, there are other video games that you should probably be playing first. There's this thing called the Ys series. Capital Y-S. Very underrated game series. Has Zelda-style gameplay, original-style Zelda gameplay, at least on some of the titles. And if you haven't played them, that's probably your first stop. I'd also play Secret of Mana and some of the other Mana titles first. This is not a game that I would necessarily recommend to newcomers, because I don't think newcomers would have the patience to deal with it, because why should they? So I kind of liked this game, but it's not a great game, and in fact it's kind of really average, all said and done. It's playable for a person like myself, but not that good. Giving it a 5 out of 10. Let me know what you guys think of this game. I have mixed feelings about it, so I would like to hear how incredibly wrong I am, or just whatever thoughts you have. And the Mana series. I've actually never played Seiken Densetsu 3, Secret of Mana 2, as it goes by unofficially, which never came out in the US. So if anyone's played that, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because doing this review reminds me of that fact, and I'm thinking I'd like to check it out, but I'm curious what you guys think. So, thanks for watching, hit the subscribe button, and see you next time.